It was one of those quiet Thursday evenings where everything felt just a little too still, as if something was about to happen. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, debating whether I should reach out to him, Russell. But he hadn't shown up this time, and I wondered if maybe whatever this was had come to an end. I hated that the thought stung, but it did. For weeks now, Russell had been coming over, and my husband, George, would simply watch from his corner chair like a silent observer to something he had orchestrated. At first, I expected shame or guilt, but the strange thing was, I didn't feel any of that. Instead, something about George's quiet acceptance made everything feel even more surreal, more intense. It was as though he wanted me to find happiness, even if it wasn't with him. Russell made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. The way he touched me, looked at me, spoke to me, it stirred something deep in me that had been buried under routine and years of silence. But that night, everything shifted. A knock at the door broke the silence. My heart jumped, assuming it was Russell, but when I opened the door, I was met with the unfamiliar face of a much younger man, maybe in his mid-20s, confident, calm, and with eyes that didn't flinch. He asked if I was Gloria, and when I confirmed, he said George had told him he'd be welcome. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't expected this. I looked over my shoulder toward George, hoping for clarity, but all I got was that same unreadable expression he always wore, like none of this was out of the ordinary. He told me it was just for fun, that he thought I might enjoy a bit of variety. I stood there frozen, unsure whether to laugh, scream, or shut the door. Everything about this moment felt unreal. The stranger introduced himself, Deshawn, and stepped inside like he belonged. George didn't say much. He poured himself a drink and settled in, unbothered, as though this entire scene had been planned without my knowledge. And I just stood there, the air thick with uncertainty and desire, my heart beating too fast. I didn't know this man, but his presence mirrored that same electric tension I once felt with Russell. And before I could convince myself otherwise, I stepped aside and let him in. I tried to steady my voice as I asked how old he was. 24, he said with a confident grin that made my heart skip a beat. I wasn't sure how to react to that. He wasn't Russell, and I didn't feel the same connection, not yet, but there was something about him I couldn't deny. Something magnetic, something bold. George stood leaning against the kitchen counter, watching the exchange with that usual amused calm. "Come on, Gloria, give him a chance," he said casually. "You didn't think Russell would be the only one, did you?" His words made my stomach twist. I turned toward him with disbelief. "He's so young," I protested, my voice caught between concern and temptation. George only chuckled, sipping from his glass. "That's the point, isn't it? To keep things interesting." Deshawn rose from the couch and walked toward me, smooth and confident. He was taller than Russell, more slender but still strong. When he reached out to take my hand, something stirred in me, excitement tangled with unease. His voice was soft as he offered me an out. "You can tell me to leave. No hard feelings." He meant it. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't pushing. He was giving me control. I could have ended it all right there, retreated into the safe, stale world I'd lived in before Russell. But something held me back. Maybe it was George's watchful gaze daring me to step forward, or maybe it was the part of me that had become addicted to the unknown. "Stay," I said, barely above a whisper. The word surprised even me. Deshawn smiled, not smugly, but with a warmth that settled the nerves inside me. "Good choice," he said softly, his hand still wrapped gently around mine. The evening moved forward like a slow dream, thick with uncertainty and curiosity. Deshawn didn't rush a thing. He was patient and gentle, sensing the awkwardness and respecting it. We sat together on the couch, talking about nothing and everything. I found myself slowly opening up to him, letting pieces of myself surface the way they had with Russell. When he finally leaned in and closed the space between us, it wasn't like before. It didn't feel better or worse, just different. He was firm but tender, and for a moment, Russell slipped from my mind completely. George didn't move from his chair. He just sat there, quietly watching like always, that same unreadable expression painted across his face as if all of this were unfolding exactly as he had imagined. Maybe it was. Over the next week, things began to change again. Deshawn came around more often, but it wasn't just about thrill anymore. There was something deeper forming. Something strange and layered. His presence started to settle into my evenings like a rhythm I hadn't realized I needed. He never pushed me, and even when George was there, silent and detached in his corner, I started to forget the awkwardness. I let Deshawn in, piece by piece. It was dangerous, and I knew it. But it was also something else. It felt like balance, fragile and flawed, but a kind of balance I might be able to live with, at least for now. Everything changed that evening. It began like any other night, with a knock at the door right at 6 p.m., so predictable it barely drew my attention. I assumed it was Deshawn again, as consistent and calming as ever. But when I opened the door, something in me stilled. My breath caught. Standing there was Russell, wearing that familiar smirk as if no time had passed at all. But he wasn't alone. Right behind him was Deshawn, his stance easy and confident, and beside Deshawn was someone I'd never seen before. A stranger. Blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and a grin that practically dripped with self-assurance. He was beautiful in a sharp, dangerous sort of way. I held onto the doorframe, trying to process what I was seeing, heart pounding in my chest. "Gloria," Russell said smoothly, like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Miss me?" Before I could even form a response, George appeared at my side, slipping his hand onto my shoulder like he'd been waiting for this moment. His tone was casual, but there was something dark beneath it. "Don't leave them outside," he said. "Invite them in." My body stiffened. I couldn't speak. I could barely move. I whispered, barely finding my voice, "What's going on?" Russell's smirk deepened, but behind his eyes was something new, something playful and just a little dangerous. "We thought we'd surprise you," he said. Deshawn added, his voice low and steady, "Figured you might enjoy some company." Company. That word echoed in my head like thunder. I had grown used to Deshawn. I had even begun to care about him, though I hadn't admitted it aloud. But this was something else entirely. 3 men, standing in my doorway, looking at me like I was the center of gravity. I turned to George, searching his expression for answers, my voice a tremble. "Did you plan this?" He just gave a casual shrug, as if this were all perfectly reasonable. "It's all part of the fun," he said. "Isn't that what you wanted?" My thoughts spun, caught somewhere between fear and adrenaline. This had started as a way to feel alive again, to rediscover something buried deep inside me. But now I was teetering on the edge of something bigger, something I couldn't name but could feel in every inch of my skin. I wasn't sure if I was terrified or thrilled. Then Russell cleared his throat, drawing me back to the present. "Can we come in, or are we just going to stand here all night?" My feet moved before my mind could catch up. I stepped aside, heart pounding in strange anticipation, and watched as the 3 men entered. Deshawn gave me a smile, soft and steady like he knew I needed it. The new man introduced himself as Mark, offering that cocky grin again, the kind that made me blush without meaning to. George, ever composed, poured himself a drink as if this night were no different from any other. "This could be fun, Gloria," he said with a knowing smirk. "Just go with it." A week ago, I had been content, maybe even satisfied, with Deshawn. Now, I was standing in my own living room, staring at 3 men who all looked entirely too comfortable here, like they belonged. My voice came out softer than I expected, laced with nerves and curiosity. "How do you all know each other?" Deshawn answered with a relaxed shrug. "Russell's got connections," he said simply. "We all have our circles." The word hung in the air, circles. It felt like a secret whispered in the dark, something forbidden and magnetic. Russell leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his eyes never leaving mine. "You didn't seem to mind me," he said with a quiet confidence. "So, I figured you might be ready to mix things up." And the truth was, he wasn't wrong. I had said I wanted something more. Something alive, something that made me feel again. And now, that very thing stood before me. 3 men, 3 different energies, 1 wildly unexpected night. My pulse thrummed with a rising sense of possibility. I was ready for more, ready to dive into the unknown. George stepped closer then, his tone gentler now. "This is all about you, Gloria. You make the call. If you want them to leave, they will." But instead of calming me, his words stirred something deeper. If I said yes, if I gave in to this, what kind of night would it become? What kind of me would emerge from it? I looked at Deshawn. His smile was relaxed, unbothered, confident. He was fine with whatever I chose, and somehow, that only made me want him more. I took a breath, not to calm myself, but to mark the moment, to drink it in. My gaze moved between them. Russell, Deshawn, Mark. Each one representing something I didn't fully understand yet, but desperately wanted to. My voice caught for a second, not from fear, but from raw anticipation. "I want this," I finally said, and the room seemed to shift. Russell stepped forward, closing the space between us. You don't have to figure it all out tonight, he said gently. We can take it slow. One step at a time. From the corner, George echoed the sentiment. Take your time, Gloria. No rush. And for once, nothing felt rushed. Everything felt deliberate, charged, as if the air itself was holding its breath with me. I wasn't scared. I wasn't overwhelmed. I was standing at the edge of something vast and exhilarating, ready to fall, no, fly, into it. The silence wrapped around us, thick with expectation, and I couldn't wait to find out where this night would lead. The air was thick with promise, an unspoken energy that curled around us like smoke. I could feel it pressing against my skin, whispering that something thrilling, something irreversible, was about to unfold. Deep down, I knew the night ahead would mark a turning point. And the most startling part? I was ready. I locked eyes with Russell, and a slow smile crept across my lips, answering the question we both hadn't dared to voice. Okay, I said softly. His grin stretched wider, mirroring my excitement. Across the room, Deshawn chuckled under his breath, that knowing look in his eyes confirming he had seen this coming all along. George lifted his glass in a quiet, almost reverent toast. His gaze found mine and held it, as if offering a wordless benediction. Welcome to the next chapter, Gloria. Let's make it unforgettable. And just like that, the night began, not with fireworks, but with a simmering intensity that filled the room. The three of them stood there, watching me, and everything in me buzzed with anticipation. It was surreal, three men, all focused on me, as if I were the only thing in the room that mattered. It felt both completely wrong and undeniably right at the same time. My heart pounded, caught between fear and fascination. Then came the words that tipped everything further into motion. Russell's voice, steady and smooth, "You're in the driver's seat tonight, Gloria. Just enjoy the ride." A shiver of exhilaration swept through me, and with it came a surge of boldness. I smiled, owning the moment. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice calm but heavy with meaning, "if you'll excuse me for a moment." I didn't explain, didn't need to. The look I gave them said it all. Something was coming, something worth staying for. I turned and walked toward the hallway, aware of every step, every heartbeat. Behind me, I could feel their eyes tracking my every movement, curious, expectant, maybe even a little reverent. And in that moment, I wasn't just Gloria. I was power. I was temptation. I was the story they'd remember. I slipped into my room and closed the door gently behind me, pausing for a breath. Alone in the quiet, I let the anticipation settle in my chest before changing into something more daring, a dress that clung in just the right places and shimmered subtly under light. It wasn't flashy, but it promised more than it revealed. When I returned, the shift in the room was immediate and electric. Russell's gaze was fixed on me, intense and unblinking. Deshawn's grin stretched wider, playful and promising, while Mark studied me with a spark of admiration that felt both new and thrilling. "Wow, Gloria, you look amazing," Russell said, his voice low and smooth. Deshawn gave a low whistle, adding with a chuckle, "You're looking like a whole meal, Gloria, ain't no snack." Mark, trying not to be outdone, smirked. "Yeah, you definitely know how to make an entrance." I smiled at their reactions, warmth rising to my cheeks. "Thank you, gentlemen," I replied, owning the space, the moment, and their attention. From his place in the corner, George lifted his glass with a casual nod and a single word, "Nice." The room pulsed with a quiet intensity now, the air thick with anticipation. I was ready, more than ready. Whatever hesitation I had carried in the beginning had melted into something far more daring. Russell was the first to approach, careful and gentle. "We'll take it at your pace," he murmured, his voice a warm reassurance. Deshawn followed, steady and solid, his nearness grounding me. Mark lingered at the edge for a moment longer, then reached out, letting his fingers brush mine, seeking connection, asking without words. I smiled and gave a small nod. I was open to whatever this night held. It all began slowly, tentative touches, soft glances, unspoken understanding. There was no urgency, only patience, as though the three of them were waiting for me to ease into the rhythm of it all. I felt my body start to relax, surrendering piece by piece. The nerves softened into a strange, surprising calm. In the background, George remained a silent presence, steady, collected, almost like a witness to something transformative. His composure reminded me that the line had already been crossed. There was no turning back now, and strangely, that knowledge didn't frighten me. It freed me. Russell leaned in, his eyes filled with care. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, my breath caught somewhere between disbelief and desire. Nothing about this night was ordinary. Mark's hand slipped to the small of my back, his eyes dancing with excitement and something tender, too, a boyish uncertainty that mirrored my own vulnerability. Behind me, Deshawn's chuckle was low, rich, and reassuring. "Relax, Gloria," he said, "just let it happen." And I did. Somewhere between heartbeats and touches, time ceased to exist. Nothing else mattered but this moment, and the story we were about to write together. Time lost meaning as minutes melted into hours. Boundaries blurred and dissolved, revealing parts of myself I hadn't known were waiting beneath the surface. I felt powerful, alive, and wholly in control. George didn't say much, just the occasional nod or a quiet murmur of encouragement, and strangely, his presence didn't unsettle me. If anything, it intensified the surreal magic of the night. When everything finally stilled, the room was wrapped in a hushed calm. A strange, serene peace settled over me, like the exhale after a long-held breath. Deshawn was the first to break the silence. "You okay, Gloria?" he asked, his voice low and gentle. I nodded, too spent to speak, but the smile on my lips was enough of an answer. Russell lay nearby, a satisfied grin spreading across his face. "Told you it'd be fun," he said, his tone easy and teasing. Mark looked dazed, still catching his breath, eyes flickering with disbelief. "That was, wow," he murmured, almost to himself. George stood then, stretching like someone who had just witnessed something sacred. "Well," he said with a quiet chuckle, "I'd say that was a success." I gave him a tired smile, too relaxed to offer anything more. As the others began gathering their things, the weight of what had just unfolded began to settle in, but not as regret. I lay back against the pillows, feeling content, not just with the experience but with myself. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether this was a singular spark or the start of a fire I couldn't put out. But in that moment, I didn't care. I felt free, and for once, that was more than enough. George leaned down as he passed me, his voice softer than before. "Sleep well, Gloria," he said. And I knew I would. This chapter of my story had peeled back yet another layer of who I was. Where this road would lead, I didn't know. But I was no longer afraid to find out. Thank you for joining us on this daring and deeply personal chapter of Gloria's journey. Her choices may be unconventional, but they echo a very real human longing for connection, excitement, and the freedom to rediscover oneself beyond the boundaries of routine. As her story unfolds, we're reminded that sometimes, it's not about right or wrong, but about being honest with what we truly crave. If Gloria's story moved you, challenged you, or made you think, don't forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss a moment from this channel. There's so much more to come, stories that will make you feel, question, and maybe even reflect on your own life in ways you didn't expect. This story is a work of fiction, inspired by emotionally complex situations many may relate to. It is intended for mature audiences and does not promote or condone infidelity, manipulation, or any form of unethical behavior. Viewer discretion is advised. Thank you for watching. And remember, your story matters too.